Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the DataViz conference so far. My name's Sarah Bartlett, and today I'm going to be talking to you about dashboards that deliver and why understanding the user is key to success. I currently work as a Tableau enablement consultant at Red Hat, where I help enable our global Tableau community. Prior to that, I worked for 4 years in consulting, where I created many dashboards for lots of different users and companies. So I have a lot of experience in this area. I'm not a UX designer, but I can sympathize with a lot of the things we've been talking about in the prior discussion. And my talk today is going to be primarily focused on UX design and how we apply those processes to this dashboard design. I'm a 3-time Tableau visionary, a 5-time Tableau ambassador. I'm the co-leader of the London Tableau user group, and I'm also the founder of the IronQuest community project. If you want to find me on social media, I'm pretty much Sarah Loves Data everywhere. And I also have a blog at sarahlovesdata.co.uk. So if you're watching this talk, I'm going to assume at some point you've created a dashboard for someone else. It's often easier to create dashboards for ourselves because we know exactly what we want. We know what our likes and dislikes are, and we know what we want to get out of the dashboard. It's much harder when we're tasked with creating dashboards for others. We become responsible for if that dashboard is useful, and we're also responsible for how our users feel when using the dashboard. I want you to think of a dashboard that you've created for others. How did you think your users felt when they interacted with it? Did they feel empowered, in control, enlightened? Or perhaps did they feel confused, frustrated, or overwhelmed? And I really hope none of your users feel like the bottom right emoji. In this session, I'm going to cover some techniques to help you create dashboards that help your users feel in control and empowered. I'm going to teach you how you can apply some design thinking techniques to your dashboard creation process. And by the end of this session, hopefully you'll be equipped to think like a designer and better understand your users' needs. Let's start with this dashboard by my good friend Zainab Iodineji, taken from Tableau Public. This dashboard was created for a real-world fake data challenge, which is a community project within the Tableau community, where participants are tasked with creating a dashboard using a fake data set. This one looks at fake call center data. It allows its users to compare performance across days and months and also shows trends over time. It also enables our users to quickly see significant changes in key metrics. You can see Zainab's use color to kind of highlight where there's underperformance, for instance. Overall, I think it does a good job in addressing what I believe to be its users' needs. But when we think about what goes into designing a successful dashboard, we often think about the visual presentation of the data and nothing more. We often obsess about things like the colors, the fonts, where we're going to put different items on the dashboard, or the chart types we're going to use. Now, while all of these things are really important, and I'm not saying we shouldn't focus on them because we absolutely should, in reality, there's a lot more that goes into designing a successful dashboard than meets the eye. In fact, a dashboard has several layers. Let's work through these layers one by one. So the topmost layer is the surface layer. So this refers to the visual representation or presentation. This is what we see on the dashboard. It's the charts, the colors, the fonts, the things I've just described. Now, if we dig below the surface, the next layer is a layer of structure. This refers to the overall design layout, the dashboard layout, and how the different parts of the dashboard are structured on the page and how they're placed in an order that makes the most logical sense for the audience. The next layer down is the user flow. So this is where we figure out how our users will be interacting with the dashboard. For instance, what action will happen when a user clicks on a filter or hovers over a particular mark. Perhaps they might see a tooltip pop up, or they may be navigated to a different part of the dashboard. If we go another layer deeper, this layer is about scope. This is where we decide what the dashboard should focus on and what we shouldn't include in our scope, or what it's not trying to do. So here we have some examples. So here we're saying that the dashboard should focus on performance by agent, but we might not want to compare our performance across quarters. Finally, the bottom layer of the iceberg and our foundation is the layer of strategy. And this is where we identify who our users are, what problems they're trying to solve, and what the potential business value of the dashboard is. This is also where we seek to understand our users' pain points, so we can help address them with any dashboard solution we come up with. More often than not, we place too much emphasis on the upper layers and overlook the bottom foundational layers. And as a result, we may end up with a dashboard that looks good on the surface, but doesn't meet our users' needs. As such, it's unlikely to be adopted or achieve its goals. This rings true, I guess, when you think about some dashboards you may have seen out in the wild that aren't particularly great, but they are used by a lot of people. It may not be a great user experience, but those dashboards might be getting at those bottom layers. But in reality, all the layers need to work together in harmony to create a great user experience. When creating a dashboard, it can be helpful to follow a design process to help guide our thinking and ensure we focus on all layers of the iceberg, starting at the bottom and then working our way up. So let me introduce you to the design process. This really helps to guide our thinking and helps to ensure that all those layers work together. The design process is made of 4 parts, and it starts with the discover phase. So this is where we start looking at things like who our users are going to be, what do they like and dislike, what is it they need to achieve, and what do they need to do with the dashboard. We then move on to the distill phase. So this is where we're seeking to understand what our users' main goals are and what the goal of the dashboard should be. Here we'll look at patterns from our research in the discover phase and determine what the dashboard should seek to accomplish. Next, we move on to the ideate phase. So this is where we take everything we've learned so far and actually start to put together a solution that can, so this is where we create our dashboard or create dashboard ideas and wireframes that really help seek to understand the user and how we can best meet their goals and ensure their success. And then finally, we move on to the validate stage. So this is where we look to see how we can improve upon our design and better align our design to our users' goals. So we validate our approach. With this process, the first 2 stages, so discover and distill, are designed to strengthen the bottom foundational layers of the iceberg. So this is where we determine our scope and our strategy. And then the latter 2 phases involve creating the dashboard and helping to tie everything together. So this is where we create something and we put it in front of our users and seek feedback. During this talk, I have a section on each of the processes and we'll share with you some techniques you can apply in your own work. So let's start with the discover phase. So the goal of the discover phase is to understand who our users will be and what they really need. I'm sure you're aware that users can be misleading. You know, sometimes they might say one thing and mean another. They might not tell us exactly what it is they want or need or what they're trying to achieve with the dashboard. And that's why it's really important that we dig deep in this discover phase to understand exactly what it is they want and why. And then only then can we ensure that we actually meet their needs. I wouldn't want you to get through this process and have a dashboard that doesn't meet their needs. So when you put it in front of them, they're like, oh, you know, that's not really what we wanted. And then the dashboard doesn't get used. I also want you to remember that you are not the user. The user may have very different ideas and preferences to you, and that's perfectly normal. We need to make sure we fully understand what they need and how to best meet their needs. This process typically starts with a series of requirements gathering sessions. So this is where we usually meet with a stakeholder, which could be the person or team who've requested the dashboard, and ask them a series of questions. We want to seek to understand key information, such as who is going to use the dashboard, so who's our audience. We want to understand what they are trying to monitor or understand, so what exactly is it the dashboard is designed to do. We want to understand how they use this information. What are they going to do with it? What action are they going to take once they use the dashboard and perhaps find an insight? We want to understand how often they're going to use the dashboard. So they're going to use it every day, every week, every quarter, maybe once a year, or maybe they're going to use it multiple times a day. All of this will play into our final design. We want to understand how they're going to access the dashboard. So they're going to access it on a laptop, or on desktop, on a tablet. Are they going to access it while they're on the run, maybe on a flight? Again, all of this is going to have an impact on our final design. And finally, we want to understand how familiar they are with the data. So is the data being presented very familiar to them? Is it something that they're looking at day in, day out, or is it something that's brand new? And if it's something that's brand new, it's probably going to require some more explaining than if it's something that's familiar. During this process, I really want you to question the obvious. It's really important to dig into questions and question what you may think or assume to be one way, just so we can understand the user and what it is exactly they need. This process helps to keep aside our assumptions whilst engaging with our users. A great technique to do that is a technique called the 5 whys. So the 5 whys is an iterative, interrogative technique that involves asking why 5 times. So it's literally as simple as it sounds. We're asked why. The reason we ask why 5 times is so we can get to the root of what we're asking. It also helps us to break down any assumptions that we might have about our users and their needs. For instance, if we ask why twice, we may not get to the real key ask or goal of the dashboard. So let's work through an example here. So here I have an example where a stakeholder has requested a new dashboard. So that kicks off my first why. So my stakeholder has said they want to see the impact of an online training course. Okay, great. So we get an understanding of why they need a dashboard. Let's ask why again. To understand if employees are completing the course. Okay, so we're getting a good understanding that they need a dashboard to track course completion. Let's ask why again. They want to see which teams have completed the course and where they could improve. Okay, great. So I think by now we have a good sense of exactly what it is they want to see, the data they want to track, and what they hope to achieve with it. Now we could stop there, but we may not have got to the root ask of their question, or maybe even who their audience is. So let's keep going and let's ask why again. To show the leadership team how well we are doing across the organization. Now, instantly, we have a new user or audience type, the leadership team. They weren't mentioned in those first 3 steps. So this is it's a really important part of the information and something that we need to understand to ensure that we can design something that meets their needs. Let's ask why a final time. So leadership can take action to encourage more enrollments where needed. So now we understand the leadership team are going to be using this dashboard, and we also understand exactly what action they need to take with it. So they're going to be able to look for course completion stats and look for where they may be underperforming, and then take the relevant action to achieve better performance. If we'd stopped at that 3rd why, we wouldn't have understand those final 2 steps, and we may have missed kind of like the ask of the dashboard entirely. This is why this process is so effective. By the end of the discover phase, ideally we want to have discovered and identified who our users will be and what we know about them. We want to try and find out as much information as we can about our audience. We want to identify business value questions. These are typically questions that are aligned to business goals that you would go to the dashboard to seek to understand. For example, are we on track to meet our quarterly targets? We want to understand and define the so what to the potential business impact. Why do we need a dashboard in the first place, and what is it trying to achieve? We want to seek to understand current challenges. So perhaps there's a dashboard that the users are using at the moment, but it's not effective. We want to understand why that is and what's causing it to be ineffective. And we want to understand ultimately what action the dashboard users will take with the dashboard. So what change is it going to bring? Once we've gathered, by this stage, we've gathered a ton of information, and we need to seek to understand it and narrow down our focus and understand exactly what we're building and who for. And this is where we come to the distill phase. So based on what we know about the users, we can start to build out user personas. This is one of my favorite parts of this process. Personas are fictional characters which are created based upon our research to represent different user types that might use the dashboard. Personas help us to emphasize with our users and understand their unique needs, experience, behaviors, goals, pain points, etc. And based on our research, we want to look for commonalities and challenges across our user base. So when we're putting together personas, we're really having a chance to walk in our users' shoes and see things from their perspective. So as we're putting together these personas, we want to look for commonalities. So perhaps people in the same role all have a similar experience and similar challenges. Sometimes there may be sub-personas. So for instance, you may have sales managers who all meet on the surface the same persona, but there may be regional differences where certain sales managers in different regions have different pain points or ways of working. When thinking about personas, ideally we want to create a dashboard experience for each persona. That's not always possible, but that's the ideal state. So that just ensures we're not designing something to meet all the needs for all the people. And ideally, we want to refine these personas through research. So as we go through this process and speak to more users, we can come back to our personas and refine them as needed. We'll typically present our persona on a one-page document like the one you see here. It's split into different sections, so we can see we've got background, preferences, goals, and pain points. We typically create a template per persona, And then it's good to include quotes from real users to help bring their story to life. And when we consider personas, we'll often identify users who have vastly different attributes. So for example, let's consider a typical executive and analyst persona and how they differ. So here we're looking at an executive persona, and we can see on a scale that the executive is probably less familiar with the data than perhaps an analyst would be. They probably don't look at it as often as perhaps we would like, but again, somewhere in the middle. When in terms of the time spent looking at something, they're probably strapped for time, so they're probably not going to spend very long looking at it at all. But in terms of the outcome, they're going to be the decision makers, so they're going to be the ones that really drive that outcome. And in terms of level of detail, given the fact that they don't have much time, they probably want something that's simple and easy to consume. So if we compare that to an analyst, they probably want to be they're probably already very intimate with the data. They're probably the ones building the dashboard or using it frequently. They probably have more time to consume it as well. In terms of outcome, they're probably looking for insight rather than to make a decision. So they probably want to dig into the data and find those insights and get to the bottom of them. So in terms of what they need, they probably want something that's a little more complex. Also in the distill phase, we want to get an idea of the strategic vision. So this typically would include our goals, so the business value and impact of the dashboard, our desired outcomes, so what are our measures of success and what actions are needed to drive those outcomes. We'll have a good understanding of our people, so our audience and their goals and challenges from the persona exercise. We should have a good understanding of the timeline, so exactly what are we going to be delivering and when, so we can communicate that and hold ourselves to account. And finally, the data. So where is our data? What does it look like? How do we get access to it? And that kind of thing. So the next stage is the ideate phase. So this is where I think we have the most fun. This is where we start formulating ideas and sketching designs. So in the ideate phase, it's really helpful to just write everything down. So just do a brain dump of everything that you've discovered in the prior two phases. By this stage, you likely have lots of ideas. So we really want to just get those down on paper so we don't forget them. We ultimately want to start sketching ideas and comparing them to our goals. Sketching is a really good technique because it doesn't take much effort, and any ideas that don't work can easily be discarded. We don't get attached to them like we do if we create something on a computer. So next, we want to push ourselves to think of more ideas. And there's ways to do this. So you could, if you're struggling for ideas, you can seek inspiration externally. So some of my favorite sources of inspiration are sites like Tableau Public. So Tableau Public contains thousands of examples of business dashboards. So even if you're not using Tableau as your end design tool, you should be able to find some designs there that inspire you. Another resource that I like to use is Dribbble. So this is a fantastic site, again, where you can find modern dashboard designs that you might be inspired by. Once you've solidified your ideas, you can start wireframing. So a wireframe is essentially a pictorial representation of your dashboard idea. The dashboard wireframe itself is not fully functional, but it can be used to represent the layout, design, functionality of the actual dashboard that you'll actually produce. This is useful as it means that we can gather feedback on our ideas without committing too much time to the actual design. And when we start the wireframing process, we typically start with a simple lo-fi wireframe. And you can just use pen and paper for this. We want to keep it as simple as possible. The wireframes can be quick to sketch, and then we can adjust them as needed. When I'm doing this process, I typically use sticky notes and draw charts on sticky notes, and that allows me to move them around the page and throw away any ones that I don't decide to go with. We can actually show our stakeholders the dashboard wireframe and get their feedback on it early. So that means we can refine that design before we move on to the next stage. And once we have a better idea of how things will look, we can move on to a hi-fi wireframe. So this is a more comprehensive, refined view. Figma is a great tool for wireframing, as it allows you to mimic user interactions and create a realistic user experience. And after we complete the wireframing phase, we should have a good idea of exactly what it is we need to build. So only now are we ready to build the dashboard. So we'll go away, build the dashboard, and then we reach the validate phase. So this is where before we jump ahead and push our dashboard to production and share it with everyone, we really want to tackle this phase. This is where we actually show our dashboard to users and seek their feedback. We're looking for ways to improve our design and validate how well it meets our users' goals. At this phase, it's best to start off by getting some lightweight feedback. So this is where you put your dashboard in front of users or maybe some trusted stakeholders and just get their quick feedback on some things that might need improving or changing. This is helpful because you've probably spent a lot of time on the dashboard at this stage, so you want to see where you may be missing things. So here, I've got an example using Zainab's dashboard of things we might want to change. For instance, add a feedback button, add some target lines to our Spark lines and that kind of thing. We can go away and make those changes before moving on to the next stage, which I like to call user labs. So if your dashboard is going to be used by a large group of users, you might want to consider doing user testing. This is more time consuming than the methods that I've spoken about so far, but it can be incredibly insightful as it enables you to see firsthand how your users will interact with the dashboard. User labs allow you to watch real users use the dashboard in a test environment, and I can't emphasize how insightful this really is. With this approach, you typically give users a series of tasks and ask them to complete those tasks one by one. This helps you to record and compare results across different users and helps you to understand if all users struggle with the same things. The typical questions or tasks you might want to ask your users are things like, where would you click to do this thing? Or where would you click to filter by region? What were our total sales in 2022 for the West region? Or how do I navigate to the next dashboard? And watching this live is really insightful because you see where they struggle. You see where maybe they don't understand how to take that action. And that enables you to go away and then correct it. So when doing user labs, I would say they're best done on a one-to-one basis, so just you and the user, but they can be done in group settings if required. It's just sometimes users may not want to open up in that kind of setting. They can be done virtually or in person, it doesn't really matter. If you're doing them virtually, you just ask the users, share their screen and watch how they navigate around. With this process though, it's really important to ask your users to think out loud. You really want to understand what they're thinking as they're working through the dashboard. This enables you to see where they're confused about things or perhaps don't understand. So you may be asking, when have you finished? When will all this be done? So with all this testing and refinement, you may question yourself and you feel like you're going on forever. But ultimately, I'd say you can finalize the dashboard once your users can confidently complete all of the main tasks without any help. So to recap, I know we've covered a lot. Let's just go back quickly through what we've learned. So we started off by looking at this iceberg. We learned that a dashboard is made of several layers, and more often than not, we place too much emphasis on the upper layers and overlook the bottom foundational layers. As a result, we end up with a dashboard that looks good on the surface, but doesn't meet our users' needs. We also looked at the dashboard design process. This helps us to guide our thinking and helps each of the dashboard layers work together. It contains 4 steps, each with unique goals. So discover, distill, ideate, and validate. And it's important to remember that this is an iterative process. It's not linear. For instance, we may get to the distill phase and find that we don't have enough information about our users or goals, in which case we can go back to the discover phase, do some more discovery work before continuing. And likewise, we may jump ahead. So we may jump from distill straight to validate if we have some ideas that we're unsure of and we want to test them out before we take them any further. If you're looking to implement this yourself, I know it sounds like a lot of work, but this process can really help you create dashboards that are more successful the first time around. And it can help with a lot of rework that you may otherwise have to do. So I'd say if you're looking to start this yourself, start small, look for where you can make changes. Perhaps there's an area where users struggle, so maybe tackle that first. You might want to validate your current dashboard. So you might want to go straight to that validation stage and do some user testing with your users and understand how they feel with your dashboard today and identify areas where they struggle. Look for quick wins. Just again, look for things that can be easily rectified. And help design a repeatable process for yourself. So design templates and things that you can use time and time again with different dashboards. If you're looking for additional resources, I've listed some books here, some of my favorites on UX design and also dashboard design. I think the Big Book of Dashboard is probably the best one out there, as it includes lots of different dashboard examples that you can get inspiration from. So thank you for listening to my talk. I hope you enjoyed it. Here are my contact details if you need them, and I'm happy to take questions now.
Thank you, Sarah. I agree with our audience that that your talk was extremely useful and very well structured, and you see these grateful reactions. Really, it's so concentrated guideline, and I like to discuss all this, but we have time just for one question, but I think that it's urgent question.
Okay.
That clients often say, please use your best judgment and refuse to give an extra information. How do you usually act in such cases?
I think that's where you can skip to the validate stage. So if they're refusing to describe what exactly it is they need, I would say do some wireframes and put them in front of them. So only then will you start to be able to judge their feelings and if they sympathize with that design or if it's not going to work. And then you can keep refining that process. I find often when I worked in consulting, I'd come against this and people would say, just build a dashboard. I don't really want to say what we want. And then you put the wireframe in front of them and then it's like, oh, okay, well, we didn't want it like that. We didn't want it quite like that. And I don't really understand what this chart is showing me. So it's only when you get to that stage, you can refine it and improve.